Should you use pins or ferrules when you're wiring in the Orion XS? Hi folks, I'm Roger from Offgrid, and in this episode I'm going to just give you my thoughts and benefit of the experience that we've had of wiring in the Orion XS, and just discuss the pros and cons of using ferrules versus pins. So let's get to it. So as you can see with the Orion XS, which is much smaller and lighter than the original TR Smart 30 amp, it's really a nice little bit of kit, but it comes ready made with this shroud or cover at the bottom. So this serves two purposes. Firstly, it's a shroud and a covering to protect the cables from something inadvertently touching them and causing a short or a spark. And the second is that it actually fastens the cables down. So as you can see, these press down into there, and once this is fastened down nicely, the cables can't move at all. So it really secures the cables quite nicely. The Orion XS has these grub screws with round holes that the wires need to go in, as you can see. Let's contrast that with the original 30 amp. So the 30 amp has these sort of TR fasteners, and these are completely square. You've got a flat screw here that is quite well protected. Once everything is in here, it's difficult to short things, but it is possible. But anyway, these are nice and square, and you have this plate that moves up. So as you loosen or tighten the screws, let's see. As you loosen or tighten the screws, you can see the plate moves up, and that is what compresses the cables and fastens the cables nicely. Before the Orion XS came out, when we used this, the ideal way of fastening cables in there would be to use a ferrule. So here's the most common ferrule that we like to use. So basically the process would be that you you cut the insulation off at about the length that you think that the ferrule is, and get some specs. And you carefully put the ferrule on so that you don't have any stragglers coming out, which is fairly easy. Use a ferrule crimper, and these crimpers that you can get pretty easily and cheaply are capable of up to 16 mil ferrules. You have to do it in 2 bits, or you do it in 1 and then you slice it off. To slice it off neatly, we use these Irwin cable shearers, and those do pretty well. So we cut it to the length we want, and that does distort this, as you can see, but it is quite easy once you get some pliers. Take the pliers and you straighten it out a little bit. That's left it reasonably square, and that can then plug into this quite effectively. So let's open this up again. So that's nice and open, and as you can see, this thing squeezes in, albeit tightly. So it squeezes in, albeit tightly, and is really secure. So that secures that quite well. The problem with this particular one in the Orion XS is, let's open one of these. You can take the grub screw right out if you want, but this is just not happy to go in here. You have to push it pretty hard. So it does eventually go in, but you have to push it really, really hard, or you have to take it out and actually using your pliers round these off so that you can get this in. And that does work, but it's not the ideal solution. And what we found, invariably you can't get it in, so you take it out to round it off a little bit more, and even though you have crimped this, it just pulls off. As you can see, it comes off quite easily. So that makes it reasonably difficult to get into here. You don't really want to put this wire in without some sort of ferrule or a pin or anything, because it's quite easy to get stragglers that come out, and that's not ideal. So not an ideal situation like this. Using pins is not a bad idea. So I've got several pins here. So this is what a pin looks like. It's got this part that you crimp onto the cable, and then this part here, which is the pin that will go into the fastener. And I've got two different 16, so we've got a 16, 25 and 35, and these get to be quite thick, but you can use a normal crimper for them. And for the 16, I'll put those aside. For the 16, I've just got two different types here, and they're different sort of strength of metals, different thickness of walls, but they both serve the same purpose. These are particularly nice that I quite enjoy. And what you would do here is, you can see this is probably too long now, so I'll probably just take my shearers and just cut it off. And put the pin in really carefully. So this you need to do where you can actually see. That's looking pretty ideal. Then you can use your crimpers, whichever crimpers you prefer. You can use the hydraulic ones on there, but my preference is to use these particular crimpers. These handle 10 and 16 mil, and the distance from where it actually crimps the 16 to where it the sort of fulcrum here is about 23 mil. So quite a short distance with nice handles, so you can actually put quite a lot into it and rest it on a table or something if you want the extra strength. That I found, you place that in the middle and then crimp down, and that is crimped it pretty well. So you can see that's quite a nice secure for handling the 50 amp that this can take. That's nice and secure. What I then like to do, get a little bit of heat shrink. Don't need to use much in the way of heat shrink. Cut it nice and straight. The other side was slightly skewed, but anyway, let's go with that. And you put that over and heat shrink it. Now, the only thing that I don't particularly like about this is that the heat shrink widens this out, so it will fit in. So let's put it in. The pin is quite long, but that does actually fit like that. If you want to, you can cut the pin down, so you could probably cut 3 or 4 mils off the pin so that the whole thing goes in, quite nice and deep. So let's just do that. So we take our shearer so we get a nice clean cut. So we're going to take about that much off. So that's cut it fairly clean. That's going in nice and deep now. So now that we can use our flat screwdriver and we can fasten that in really effectively. So what you do is you would tighten it nicely. I find if you tighten it down and you wait a few minutes, somehow it seems to have more room to tighten it down. So things seem to slack off inside there. So initially you get it really tight, leave it a few minutes, and when you come back, you find you can tighten it down again a little bit. So that's how I do that. So you wait just a while, and then it can tighten down really nicely. And then from that moment on, it is completely secure. Remember I mentioned about the heat shrink. You don't want to use very thick heat shrink because it uses up, it gets to be a little bit wider here, and you can eventually get to the point where this is difficult to get on. At the moment, this does squeeze on, and it will tighten down and secure this, and you can see how well secure that is. Practically, I'm just going to cover something, because this is something that you should actually think about. So we come from the starter. We have a lug going on to the starter battery because the alternator is connected to the starter battery with a really good thick cable anyway. So there's no need to go directly down to the alternator unless it's actually easier. So we come off the starter battery, come straight to a fuse, very short distance. Our cable from where we connect to the battery to the fuse is absolutely no longer than this actually. It's usually a short little cable. Come to a MIDI fuse, and we either have an 80 amp MIDI in there if it's a Orion XS, or if it's one of the others like the 30 amp, we then use a 60 amp fuse. So just a little bit of a rabbit trail on that. When you're fusing, you should not exceed the cable rating. So it's no use putting a 200 amp fuse into a cable only capable of carrying 100 amps. And as we know, these 16 mil cables are rated at up to 100 amps. So an 80 or a 60 amp fuse is well within the capacity of the cable. And then obviously your fuse must be greater than the application that it is actually fusing. So in this particular case, 50 amp. So the cable can carry 100 amp. This needs 50 amp. So anything between 50 and 100 amp. So actually a 60 amp fuse or an 80 amp fuse would have been absolutely fine. In our case, a little bit more margin for error. We often put an 80 amp fuse in with the installation when we do an Orion XS. Anyway, we come so from the starter battery through a fuse and finally comes into the in on the Orion XS. The same would have been for the TR. We would have gone into the in here from the starter battery. And the thing is, when you're doing this installation, invariably you need access to the starter battery for a number of things. So firstly, you may want to install something like a battery master. This will trickle charge your starter battery from the leisure battery, so it keeps the starter battery in good condition. And there are other alternatives to this. So Able Mail, for example, I think Victron have one or two things. And there are several things that trickle charge a starter battery from the leisure battery. These are particularly good for lithium setups, and they really do look after the starter battery. So they trickle charge it by about 1 amp or just over 1 amp when the starter battery is starting to run low. So you'll need to connect the brown cable. If you're using one of these, you'd need to connect the brown cable to the in of the XS. The other thing that you might want is if you've got a smart shunt, you're going to want to connect the aux input of the smart shunt probably to your starter battery as well, so that it's possible to easily see your starter battery voltage when you go on the app or when you look on VRM or something like that. So handy to have a few things that can connect to the starter battery to read the voltage off that. So when you're actually doing these pins, what you want to do, let's find my blade, what you want to do here, so let's bear this a little bit for putting a pin on the other side. Put that to the side. You see that goes in pretty easily. It's a little bit of play there. That's fine. Then let's say we're going to use another bit of wire and we're going to connect your battery masters and various things. So you could put actually multiple things in here with this. We can put two small wires quite comfortably in with this, or you could just put a single wire going in like that. And notice there's a little straggler there, so I'm going to redo that to make sure that I get the straggler under control. You can deal with the stragglers with the heat shrink as well, obviously. So that's gone in quite nicely. And so on this side, I could put a Wago to connect to the various things. And even if you're not going to use this immediately, it might be an idea to, when you're doing the installation, to actually put a wire in, even if you just tape it up and leave it as a standby in case you want to install a battery master or read the engine voltage or whatever. So, and then those tend to crimp in quite nicely. This is a much thicker, harder, but you can see why I like these particular crimpers, because they have such good leverage, nice long handles. You can see that's pretty good. That's a really solid crimp. The two wires coming. So I would rather put the wires like this than to have multiple things going in with that. I want a really good solid connection going onto this pin here without other stuff getting in the way and interfering and that sort of thing. So it's just my preference. Let's get some more heat shrink here. Let's get the side that's straight. And that would also go over quite nicely there. Place it to about there. So that's secured this quite nicely. Nothing can short this. And once it's actually in, so obviously if you're coming from the starter battery, you're going to go in the in here. So I'm not going to cut this pin down. Just going to leave it like that, because you can if you want to. As you'll see, it'll all fit in quite nicely and happily. And close that down. I'm just going to cut this cable here. Just cut it in half so that I show you. Going in on the other side. And let's tighten this down. You want to go pretty tight, and as I said, wait a few minutes and come back to it, and then nip it up. So those are really, really tight. There's going to be really good contact in there, and you'll find that this can still, you may have to push somewhat hard to get it back down, but you'll find that the screws will take. That's gone in nicely. And this one here, be careful, these screws, you can round them off so easily, so be careful. Use a good screwdriver that's good sharp edges inside, not an old worn one. And that is really secured it well. So you notice we'd obviously have the black one in the middle, but you notice how secure these are. They're really well secured, very safe. Nothing can touch them. There's no possibility of anything actually inadvertently touching these. Very solid connection in there. So with these with the Orion XS, my preference is by far to use these pins. I find they're really handy to use. If you don't have pins, you can use ferrules. It's fine. As I said, you'd have to round the thing off or get a hex crimper. These little square ones are far cheaper and really easy to get hold of. But yeah, this would be my preference. This is how I would wire it. As you can see, that's really solid and secure, not going anywhere, making really good contact. You're not going to have heat build up from the connection here. It's going to be pretty good. So hopefully you found that useful. If you look in the links below, we've got various references to some of these tools. As you've seen, this is my absolute favorite crimping tool, just because you've got so much leverage, and it's got quite a wide bar here that actually does the crimping. You can use some of these others like this one here, but as you can see, it's got a far smaller area that it really almost like cuts a hole into it. It's not my preference to use these, and a much shorter handle, so you've got to push like crazy, although because this is smaller it goes in easier. This crimps it really effectively. We've had very good success using these particular crimpers, so I would highly recommend that. Yeah, hopefully you find that useful. Look in the links below. I think we've got some specials on the Orion XS, so a really good bit of kit. As you can see, the comparison between it and the original TR Smart, it's absolutely tiny, runs much cooler, gives you much more info. It's just absolutely vastly superior to the old 30 amp. 30 amp does the job, but I really do like the Orion XS. So look in the link below, and we'll see you in the next episode. So thanks for watching. Cheers.